This is a GK Media podcast. Hello and welcome to Business Bytes here on Gary Talks, where every week I'm joined by various international business owners and entrepreneurs. And I'm delighted to be joined actually in studio today by Craig Brown, who is an aficionado, a real leader in recruiting. Craig, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Craig, you have a huge amount of experience in recruiting. You worked for the big corporates for years. You've trained a lot of people, 19,000 people, and over 1.5 million minutes of watch time in your online tutorials. It's amazing the amount of content and the amount of people who you have helped out there. And you have a book as well, which we'll flag at the start, the Lean Recruiting Toolkit, where people can get further insights. But you have a variety of online courses to help people when it comes to recruitment. And I think it's a real interesting area for both employers and employees. So we'll just get straight into it, if you don't mind. And, you know, I think there's a lot of mistakes employers are making. But firstly, where should an employer go to find the right person?
Where should they go? Well, there's a number of different places they can go. I suppose the go-to for most employers is to post a job ad and hope for the best. It's called post and pray, you know. So, and if you run the type of business where there's very high turnover and there's not a lot of technical skills required, that can work. Things like contact centers, you'll always get people apply. But for those, more difficult roles, you'd really be looking at either using the services of a recruitment firm or going and trying to do some Boolean search yourself, some search online to try to root out those harder to find candidates.
Which is, I suppose, hard for a lot of employers out there because they're juggling so many plates. And it comes into the thing of, is going down the line of a recruitment agency the first choice one should be making?
I think it depends on how you look at recruitment. Is it, do you view it as an expense, hiring people, or do you view it as an investment? When you hire someone, you expect them to do something that will increase the value of your company. So I tend to work with firms that go with that sort of definition. Working with recruiting firms, it's expensive. Depending on the country you live in, most agencies will charge between 15 and 20%. So that's a one-off commission equal to 15 or 20% of the base salary of the new hire. So that's a lot. That's the equivalent of 2 or 2.5 months salary. But if you can't afford that, then you really shouldn't be hiring someone because you can't afford to employ someone. So,
and it's the employer who pays that kind of 20% commission? It doesn't come out of the employee's wage?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think what you said there about you consider taking on someone as an expense or an investment, it's that keen awareness for an employer to actually know what they want for the employee coming in that will generate further turnover, that will become an investment, rather than saying, we need someone just because we're busy at the moment and to take up, the reins to a certain degree. It's important to say, okay, if we bring someone in the door, how can they what do they need to do to scale the business for us?
Yeah. And I think, the very first step is deciding whether or not you actually do need to hire someone. Quite often it's a bit of a gut instinct. When someone quits or someone moves on, you think, right, we have to fill that position. But actually, do you? Maybe the business environment has changed. Maybe the industry has changed. Can you cover a bit of work with overtime? Can you cover it with, an outsourced firm or something like that? But if you do need to hire, then you need to clearly define what it is that you need this person to do every day. So,
and have you come across a lot of people who hire, but the intention is to fire within a certain probationary period? So they're really just looking for someone to tide them over for a short period.
I've never really seen that, actually. I think the thing is when you do decide to hire someone, it's quite a commitment on the employer's part because they're not going to be up and running for a while anyway. You have to go through all the paperwork, the admin, and then on top of that, you have to train them and get them used to the company and how things work. So I've not really seen that, no.
Yeah, because it's not very productive in the long run for anyone.
No.
But another situation that I have come across from recruiters before, and it was their own frustration, where they could there could be a big job, a high-end job in a company, and they'd whittle it down to maybe 10 potential interviewees that they would put forward, and some would get into the closing rounds that would take place and maybe even be offered the job, but then pull out. But they were using the interview process as a way to go back to their current employer and say, do you know what? I've been offered this role, X amount of money. Can you do better?
Yeah, I've seen that a couple of times. I think more often, though, it happens by accident. They're genuinely looking for a new job. They get a better offer and they think, you know what, just before I leave, let me just double check and see if I can do better at home. I don't think that happens a terrible amount, really.
But it must be frustrating, though, for the recruiter.
Yeah, I've had it happen a couple of times. So the key for the recruiter is to be generating enough numbers that if you lose one or two people, it's not going to matter. The other key is to hurry, is to be very, very fast. If you sit there, if you ask someone, how long does it take you to hire someone? They'll generally say, oh, it's about 3 or 4 weeks. But actually, when you break it down, it's normally a lot longer than that. So let's say somebody applies for a job on Monday the 1st. Okay. It'll probably take a couple of days for someone to actually just review that resume, review that CV, and then they'll reach out to the candidate and say, hey, look, when can you do a screening call? By the time the emails go back and forth and that's organized, you've already lost a week.
Yeah, easy.
And that's just for the first call with the HR administrator. So assuming the person passes that, their details will then be forwarded to the hiring manager to review. This hiring manager, she or he, this is probably the least important thing on their plate. They're trying to do their job and do a little bit of hiring on the side as well. So you're probably looking at another 4 or 5 working days before that person responds. And then you're trying to coordinate interviews and things like that. So really from the time a resume is received until someone signs a job contract, it's normally 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks. If you can get that down to 3, you're going to save yourself a lot of problems, and you're going to win candidates. The really good candidates, they have choice, and they're not just talking to you; they're talking to 2 or 3 other companies at the same time. So it's really a lot of the time it's first to the finish line.
Yeah,
And
how many rounds should one typically go through in the interview process?
You want to keep it to a minimum, and you want to think about what's required for each role. You should have a different interview, a different hiring process for each type of candidate. So, for example, let's say you're hiring technical salespeople. Well, what do you really need to know about them? You need to know their work history, their approach towards sales. Have they done sales in your industry before? And you might decide that a psychometric test is in order as well. Salespeople are born; they're not made, to a large extent. What's
a psychometric test?
Well, it's a personality test.
Okay.
There's been a number of really good studies on consultative salespeople. There was a guy in the U.S., I guess about 12 years ago. I remember his name because he shares a name with a comedian. His name's Steve Martin, and what he did was he sat 1,000 top performing salespeople in the U.S. and sat them through psychometric tests. And the results were actually really surprising. It's not what you would expect, but these are consultative salespeople as opposed to retail salespeople who sell what they have. These are people who work with you over time to get the solution you need. And the top personality trait that the top performers shared was modesty.
Okay.
Which really surprises a lot of people. So for salespeople, getting back to your original question, you might start with, a screening call just to make sure that what's written on the resume is what's repeated to you and that sort of thing. You also want to sell the opportunity to them as well, so they'll be much more likely to stick with you through the process. I would say from there, a personality test, a psychometric test. If they pass that, you should set your score in advance, your pass rate in advance, by the way, and stick to it. If they pass that, then you might want to go on to a panel interview with a hiring manager and a couple of other people, and then wrap it up,
Okay.
Get them to sign an offer, check the references, contract, boom, start.
Okay. I know someone who went through 7 rounds of interviews for a job it was a big international organization, but
why?
Yeah. Yeah. I just wonder how many more questions do they have to ask? Is there questions that one should ask to really get clarity and insight on someone?
Again, it depends on the role. The questions you're asking in an interview should reflect what it is this person needs to do. So, first of all, when you're hiring someone, you need to decide what it is they need to do every day, and ideally, you should limit that to say 3 meta tasks. That sounds really hard to do because normally when you see job ads, there's 10, 15 bullet points and responsibilities, but really there's 3, maybe 4 main things you have to do. So, for example, in my role as a headhunter, one of my main tasks is obviously finding candidates or finding suitable candidates. Number 2 would be conducting screening calls, and number 3 would be communicating with the clients. That's it. So based on that, you decide, well, what sort of background, skills, experience, education does this people need to have in order to fulfill those tasks? And then based on that, you decide, okay, well, what questions do I need to ask? What root questions do I need to ask to elicit that information out of them? And then you can go off from there. You know, a root question could be something as simple as, tell me about your experience, back to sales, tell me about your experience selling educational software products. And then they start. And they should all start at the same place because you want to treat them as like for like as possible. Yeah. But they'll say certain things that'll bring other questions to mind, and you can go from there. I mean, the other real tip is to use a scorecard as well. So when you decide what your root questions are, write them down. And then before you interview anyone, decide what a mediocre response looks like, a good response, and a response so good that you didn't even think of that answer. And then give those assigned scores based on those responses. And again, pass or fail. If they get a certain score, off they go. If they don't, back into the sea.
And what if on paper everything is looking really positive and you interview this person and they score well, but your gut is telling you the complete opposite?
Controversial. There's a lot of, it's called unconscious bias. There's a lot of it in recruiting. We have unconscious bias because it helps us, conduct shorthand for everyday life. But in hiring, it's really not a great idea because not only for legal reasons, but you could be actually missing out on really great talent. You actually just have to be disciplined to ignore your gut instinct, because if you're relying on your gut, that means you think you're the smartest person in the room. Mm-hmm. And you might be, and you might not be. So come up with your criteria in advance and stick with them. So that means sometimes you're passing people and you think, I don't know, there's something a little bit funny there. And you could be failing people to think, that guy was great. He just couldn't pass that one test, and over time, those results will really, they'll be very good,
Interesting what you say there, because it reminds me of a CEO who is, I would consider, very successful. And when he brings people in, he always tries to find the smartest person, like someone who is way smarter than them. But I also know another CEO who doesn't encourage that because he sees them as a threat.
Well, first of all, why are you looking for smart people? Why are you measuring their intelligence? Is that critical to the role? I mean, you need a certain level of intelligence, but do you need them to be smarter than you? Do you need them to be not as smart as you? Do you need that for the role? If you're looking for, an electrical engineer, do you need them to have an IQ of 110? If so, why? Yeah. When their work history has been excellent.
Yeah. Can we talk more about the unconscious bias?
Yeah.
Like, where are people, we all have it, but where are we going wrong with it? Like, where are we being biased without realizing it?
There's about 15 different types of bias in the hiring process, but I suppose the main ones are when people say they're looking for a good fit. Okay, there's 2 kinds of fit. There's fit with when it comes to someone's experience and background as it compares to the role. That's absolutely fine. But what people normally mean is they're not like me, right? They're not similar to me. I don't know if I can work with them. So you don't really need people to be similar to you. You don't need to go out and have beers with them after work. You just need them to be really good at doing the job. So that's one kind. The other kind is
and just to go in on that, like one of the big things since COVID especially has been like company culture. And that is kind of, especially with remote working and so on, people are trying to get people together and rebuild a culture and get them going out doing paragliding for the day or going for beers or going bowling or whatever. And there's some people who just don't turn up because they don't want to turn up. And then that kind of kills the buzz and so on. And I can get it from a very professional point of view of, we're not here to be best of buds. But I think it does make a workplace really nice if, most people get along.
Yeah, it does. But we're kind of looking at this from the point of view that we want the company culture to remain the same, when in fact we shouldn't be afraid to let it to change. So if you think of it as kind of a cultural stew,
yeah,
any stew, or any food or anything you're making at all, if you add more of the same ingredients, you're just going to get more of the same thing. But if you start adding different things, the culture will shift over time, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe that's exactly what your company needs.
Very good, yeah. And another bias then, as an example, so good fit was one. Well,
cultural fit. So we're choosing people because they're similar to us, and the other is not choosing people because they're not similar to us. There's a ton of them. It's about having these preconceived notions about what's good and what isn't, and the key is to just try to remain disciplined enough to ignore our desire to have this quote unquote fit, this cultural fit.
We were talking before, and you were mentioning about the importance of a diversity inclusion statement. What's that?
Well, so most large organizations will have this now diversity and inclusion statement, or diversity, equity, inclusion statement. And it lets people know when they consider themselves to be from a diverse community that they're welcome to apply. And it's almost always at the bottom of the job ad in italics. It's kind of like it's an afterthought. We're doing this because we have to. It's a box ticking exercise. But I had a client a couple of years ago who kind of changed my mind on it. They put it right at the top of their job ad, and they led with a sentence, something like, at Acme Incorporated, we believe that diversity is our strength. It's what makes us better. And that's a very strong way to lead in. And then they had the rest of the statement as well. So what that shows to people who are from diverse communities, that of course they're welcome to apply, but it shows everybody else that, look, we don't really care, what sort of personality you have or who you worship or whatever the case may be, if you can do the job you're in. And it also lets people know, look, this is going to be a pretty interesting workplace as well. So I'd really recommend that you lead with that on all your job ads. Put it right at the top. The wording can be a bit tricky because acronyms can be different by country, wording and things like that. So probably a good place to look is have a look at what other companies in your industry, in your country are doing, and see what works for them if you don't already have a statement already. So,
and I think it's a good exercise for one to say, are we diverse? Do we want to be diverse? Where do we stand in terms of contemporary movement of businesses and so on?
Well, do we want to be diverse? The flip side of that is, why wouldn't we want anyone to work here?
100%. But it's still, if they aren't diverse, why aren't they? Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it comes back to bias and things like that, really, where, this is unconscious bias. People don't actually know that they're doing it. So you actually have to take a little bit of time to think about it and set up systems to make sure that you're hiring based on what people can do or their education or whatever the relevant criteria are, as opposed to letting these other criteria creep in.
You gave me a great tip before where I was always of the opinion that when someone comes in, give them 6 weeks, maybe 12 weeks, if you're still not 100% sure, don't make that conclusion that they're not, suitable for the role. Maybe you need to extend that for another few months before you make a decision. And you were saying that you need to make a decision quick enough, like within the first month.
Yeah, and it works a little bit better for everyone. So for the employer, set yourself some a little note in your calendar. So how are they doing after week 1, week 2, week 3? Are they, write down what you expect them to have accomplished by the end of week 3, because really this is when your new employee should be trying to impress you the most. Yeah. And if they're not kind of living up to the standard, then they need to go. So it's fair for the employer. But also for the employee, if it's not working out, they need to get on with their lives as well. And if it's not kind of working out after about week 3, they might think, well, I just need to kind of get used to it a bit more and need a bit more time to settle in. But really, if you're not achieving what you're meant to be doing within the first month, then it's unlikely that you're going to after that.
Yeah.
So this person can get back on the job market and start looking again for something more appropriate.
And this is where the employer needs to clearly know and clearly state what it is that they expect from the employee from the get-go, so that they're not even misleading them and saying, it's a very relaxed atmosphere when it's actually fighting deadlines hour by hour sort of thing.
Yeah, and you need to sit down with them when they're first starting work. This is what we expect you to have done by the end of week 1, week 2, week 3, and talk to them about their probationary period, which most employers don't. It's in the contract, but it's just assumed that the person's going to get through it, and it's not really a probation. It's you'll be fine. But spell out to them, if you're not meeting these targets, then we'll have to talk about your employment here, and go over how the probationary period works.
Yeah, it can be an elephant in the room at times, can't it?
It can be, but the big problems are best talked about, aren't they?
Yeah,
So
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. There's something I really liked as well, when you're saying you're putting out job posts, or even when it comes to the interview process, know what your company is about and be able to sell your company, your business to potential employees.
Yeah, that actually brings up a really good point, because there's a difference between job ads and job descriptions. Okay, so the job description is normally a fairly lengthy document, 3-4 pages. It has all of the details of the employment in there, and normally is the backbone of the employment contract. You really don't want to give this into the job candidate until, say, they're coming up to their final interview and they need more information to review. Initially, though, what you want to create is a job ad. It shouldn't be more than a page. You want to be clear about what it is that you're looking for, but you also want to sell as well. You want to make sure that the candidate thinks, where they may be working is going to be a great place. So I kind of have a formula I use. Really, the first paragraph, you talk a little bit about the company. I'm talking like 3 sentences, tell them what's so great about the company. And the reason for this is the candidate will want a bit of reassurance that if they do get the job, this company isn't going under in the next few months, and they'll be back in the job pool. So you can talk about how long the company's been in operation, if it's a long time, or how fastly it's growing. You can talk about why your customers buy from you as opposed to your competitors. It's all just to give a bit of reassurance to the applicant. Then you clearly state what the job title is. And I do that simply because I don't want people to think that I'm just trying to fill up my database with candidates. We have a very specific requirement for this role right now in this office. Then talk about the role benefits, especially if you have kind of non-standard benefits that might be interesting to the candidates. And then after that, quite simply, we talk about the responsibilities. So those are those 3 points. What do you need to do every day, or what do you need to achieve every quarter, that sort of thing. And then the next section would be about you. Those are the 3 or 4 things about your background experience. And then we have a call to action at the end, which simply is you write on there, apply now, or click the big red button, or whatever the case may be, and you'll get a better return rate off that. So this is short and crisp. It's just meant to grab people's attention. Once they look at that, the next thing they're going to do is research your company anyway. So they've got the laptop open anyway. They're going to go find out for themselves. So it's really to get their attention and tell them why it's so great for them.
What about those websites like Glassdoor, which does reviews of what it was like to work in an organization from previous employees? I mean, can we put a lot of trust in those things, or is it usually just people who left on bad terms who just leave?
I mean, I think you can put trust in it, but it tends to be extremes. People are extremely happy and people who are extremely unhappy. I've seen really poor reviews from companies that I know are quite good places to work at.
Yeah.
And the opposite's also true. So yeah, you can take it with a grain of salt. I think what's more interesting though is to do research on the company, on the social media channels, look at their website, see what future plans are. And actually, as you're doing this research, little tip for job seekers there, write down everything you don't understand, because when you're at the end of your interview and they say, do you have any questions for me? There's your questions.
And is it good to have questions?
Yeah, it's great to have questions, but you don't want to ask them what the salary is or what are the working hours. Those are a bit basic.
When should one ask that then?
If they're doing it right, they should ask you at the very first meeting, what are your salary requirements, right? But if not, you have to bring it up some point yourself before the job offer comes out. So yeah. Yeah.
I was in that situation before where I was offered a job in a national organization and I didn't know what the salary was. And I didn't want to ask because I just thought I might jinx it if I do. So I started working there. And after a couple of weeks, I actually asked what the salary is. And they said, oh, we'll get back to you. And it was a short time later, maybe a week or so, I found out what the salary was. And it was like, half of what I expected it to be. So I was like, okay, adios. That was a waste of like a month.
Well, for job seekers to get an idea, they can go online and research similar jobs, and some employers will have those salaries listed, particularly public sector,
Yeah,
so they can get some idea, but they need to know the number,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Find out at the start. What is ATS?
ATS, it's obviously an acronym, it's short for Applicant Tracking System. Any large company will already have one in play. Smaller ones might not. So it's basically a database, a CRM for tracking job applicants from the time you start reaching out to them or they apply all the way through until they sign their contract and start work. So it's just a really easy way to track people, and the vast majority of them will have posting services as well. So quite often people ask me, where should I post my job? Well, the answer is everywhere if you can, the whole post and pray routine doesn't often work, but you know what? It works for me a couple times a year. So it just gets in front of the right person sometimes. So if you post on your ATS, it'll go out to the main job boards, but there might be some more specialized job boards as well. So if you're looking for an accountant, maybe they'll have a link to a job board for accountants or something like that.
But talking about an accountant, I mean, if you're too generic in the job title that you're looking to fill, you're probably going to get a wad of applicants that aren't relevant. Whereas you say yourself, it's better to be more specific, to really niche it down to who you want.
Yeah. You want to be very precise in your job ads, but also when you're looking as well. So if you do search for candidates online, I'll tell you what, the number one tip I can give people when they're searching for candidates online is don't search by the job title. For a couple of reasons. One, that's what everybody else does. So anybody you've seen has been pretty raked over by that time. But the other thing is job titles, the same, two people can have the same job and have different job titles. It happens a lot in sales, software development. It could be a programmer, it could be an engineer, it could be whatever. So a better idea is to look down within your own job ad and pick out a couple of words that are unique to that role. So as an example, I spent a while there. I spent quite a while looking for iOS developers there for a while. So you would think, well, I'll just look for iOS developer, or is it iOS engineer, or is it software developer, or is it mobile developer, right? So you can't really do that. You're missing people. But what you can search for is Objective-C, which was one of the main languages for coding and creating iOS apps, and that's very unique. You wouldn't see that anywhere else. Do I know what Objective-C is? Not really, but I know to look for it.
That's smart.
So you're looking for words in your own job ad that either make sense to no one else outside of that industry, or they have a unique usage that wouldn't be used elsewhere. Salespeople, a really good word is quota to look for, because in my experience, salespeople who don't hit their quotas don't talk about quotas.
Okay,
right? And the ones that do, the ones that exceed quota, I've actually searched for percentage signs before, because if people hit their quota and they beat it, they want to say what percentage of quota they hit.
Yeah, very good.
So,
no, that's cool. Are you finding that people looking for jobs out there are pushing more for remote work, that they only want a job that they can work from anywhere in the world, be a digital nomad?
Yeah, some people do. I think a lot of people don't. I think what's becoming really popular is hybrid.
Okay.
Couple of days in the week. There are some things I think that are easier to get done. Brainstorming, things like that can be done in person. But I think to the employees, it's really just about getting out of the house and having a life away from home, because there's a lot of distractions there too, especially if you have a family, So I think hybrid's becoming quite popular, but there's some people who insist on remote because they want to travel or whatever. And if you're good enough at what you do, you can get away with it.
Yeah. And I suppose this is where it comes into, it's not always about the quantity of hours one does, but it's the quality of work that they bring to the table, isn't it?
No, absolutely. Yeah. Someone who's new to a role, it might take them 10 hours to do something. Someone who's been doing it for years, they may get it done in an hour and a half, you know? So it should be really more about what you're achieving, you know, in a set amount of time in a week or 2 weeks rather than what you're doing with each hour, I think anyway. So.
And you have a website then, justintimerecruiting.com. So is this aimed at those who want to become recruiters, employers, employees, or potential, you know?
Oh, well, it's a bit of everything. So it's aimed more at employers. So there's a number of e-learning courses on there teaching people how to recruit right from the get-go. There's one on there for people who are more experienced. There's another course on unconscious bias when it comes to recruiting. The book is listed on there as well. And then, you know, I promote services such as recruiting and things like that. But there's also, I have a couple of courses for people who are looking how to write the resume properly, or if they already know how to write the resume, how to go from there and actually get a job.
Excellent.
You know,
yeah, I think that's a big issue that people aren't aware of just actually getting a clear, sellable, marketable resume.
So here's the thing. Nobody's really an expert at writing resumes because you don't do it that often, right? Especially if you're the type of employee who sticks in a job for a while. How are you ever going to get good at writing resumes and interviewing and doing all these other things?
But you have like a 3-second window nearly. So like it's so important to get it done right.
Yeah. So I generally tell people that I can't review a resume in 10 seconds, but I can dismiss one in 10 seconds.
Yeah. So
that I can spend, you know, the bulk of my time on the 10% of resumes that more closely fit.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So, yeah. And that, again, this is another marketing document. You're just trying to show someone who is reviewing 150 resumes a day that you need to be on the maybe pile or the yes pile, and you have to grab people's attention very quickly. So.
And what about putting your photograph on a CV?
No, it's illegal in a lot of places.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, what do you need your photo for? You know,
and I suppose by putting your photo, you're giving away kind of, I suppose, the idea of your age, your
yeah. I mean, you're
and all that. So it does bring in the whole bias thing, possibly.
It does encourage bias. Maybe you just think you're really good looking, and that's going to get you a job. I don't know. The fact is, if you have biases, you can find things in resumes anyway. You can tell how old someone is by when they finish university. You can quite often tell their race by their name and things like that. So there's no completely stamping out unconscious bias, but you can put procedures in place to really press that down quite a bit. But yeah, I'd go no to the photograph on the resume anyway. So.
Brilliant. Just one final thing as well, which I thought was really interesting, was the replacement v refund guarantee.
Oh, yeah. So normally recruiting agencies have a guarantee, and it's normally one of two types. There's a replacement guarantee or a refund guarantee. I used to do a replacement one. So what that means is if the employer lets someone go in a certain amount of time, then you as the recruiting agency are obliged to find them someone else. But what if the requirements have changed? What if, you know, it's really hard to find like for like. What if the salary's twice as much or half as much? Does that mean you find them two people, you know? So I think what's really better for most employers is a refund guarantee. So if you take someone off a recruiting agency, you pay their fee. The person doesn't work out. If you let them go within a certain amount of time, you get a full or partial refund, depending on how they have it set up. And this is another reason why you want to be disciplined when you're hiring people, you know, if they're not working out, to let them go in a certain amount of time. So, yeah.
And I suppose it makes the recruiter, you know, be that bit more fine tuned in making sure they do get the ideal candidate.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say so.
So if people want to get just a one-on-one consultation from you, that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. They can just reach out to me via the website, and I'll get back.
And if they want to do a course, they go to the website?
Yeah, there's links to all the courses on the website. I have a lot of them posted up on Udemy, and the Unconscious Bias course was done in partnership with the Canadian Diversity Initiative. I should point out that the material isn't Canada-centric or anything like that, but we did that together and finished that recently. Yeah.
And there's a credit point system as well with one of your courses, isn't it? Is it for those in Canada who need a certain amount of points to say that they've done this hours of course or something every couple of years? Yeah.
So most HR professionals around the world will belong to a national organization. So in America, it's SHRM, SHRM. In Canada, they'll quite often have a CHIRP qualification. In Ireland, the UK, India, Australia, it's quite often CIPD. And to maintain those certifications, those HR professionals have to do a certain number of hours of learning every year. So I think the Canadian one, they need 60 hours of learning every 3 years. So the course is worth 3.5 of those credits to give them, to help them keep their qualifications. So
brilliant, excellent. Craig Brown, thanks so much for coming to the studio today. The website again is justintimerecruiting.com.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.